The bullet grazed Elena Baker's shoulder as she dove behind the overturned wagon, and in that moment of fire and chaos, she realized that her 23rd birthday would likely be her last. The scorching Montana sun beat down on Fort Benton as gunfire echoed through the dusty street, and Elena pressed herself against the splintered wood, wondering how a simple supply run had turned into a battlefield. Blood seeped through her worn calico dress, staining the faded blue fabric dark, and her breath came in short gasps as shouting voices surrounded her position. She had survived so much already, clawed her way through a life that had never offered her celebration or joy, and the bitter irony of dying on her birthday was not lost on her. The gunfight had erupted without warning when a gang of outlaws had ridden into town, their intentions clear from the moment they started shooting. Elena had been crossing the street with her basket of provisions when the first shots rang out, and instinct alone had saved her life. Now she was trapped, pinned down behind inadequate cover as bullets thudded into the wood around her. Her shoulder burned with pain, and she could feel warm blood trickling down her arm. The basket lay scattered in the dirt, flour and dried beans mixing with dust and spent shell casings. Then she heard it, a roar that seemed to shake the very ground beneath her feet. The sound was primal, furious, and entirely human. Through the haze of gun smoke and fear, Elena glimpsed a figure moving with impossible speed and purpose. He was massive, easily over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they blocked out the sun as he charged past her position. Long, dark hair flew behind him as he moved, and muscles rippled beneath his buckskin shirt. He carried a rifle in hands that looked capable of breaking a man in half, and his face was set in lines of absolute determination. The mountain man, for that was clearly what he was, fired 3 shots in rapid succession, each one finding its mark with devastating accuracy. 2 outlaws dropped from their saddles, and a third clutched his arm and wheeled his horse around. The remaining gang members, seeing their numbers suddenly diminished and facing this new threat, made the only sensible decision and spurred their horses toward the edge of town. The mountain man fired twice more, and Elena heard the sharp cry of pain that meant at least one more bullet had found flesh. Then silence fell, broken only by the nervous whinnying of horses and the settling of dust. The mountain man lowered his rifle and turned, his eyes scanning the street until they landed on Elena. They were the most striking eyes she had ever seen, a deep gray like storm clouds, and they softened immediately when they saw her pressed against the wagon, blood staining her dress. He was beside her in 3 long strides, dropping to one knee with a grace that seemed impossible for a man of his size. Up close, he was even more imposing. His face was weathered and tanned, with a strong jaw covered in dark stubble and a nose that had clearly been broken at least once. But his expression was gentle as he reached toward her shoulder, his large hands surprisingly careful. "You are hurt," he said, and his voice was deep and rough, like gravel rolling in a mountain stream. There was an accent there, something that spoke of long years alone in the wilderness. "Let me see." Elena found herself nodding, too shocked and pained to do anything else. His fingers probed the wound with expert precision, and despite the pain, his touch was remarkably gentle. She studied his face as he worked, noting the small scar above his left eyebrow, the lines that fanned from the corners of his eyes, the sheer strength evident in every feature. His hair was indeed long, reaching past his collar, and it was thick and dark with threads of silver catching the sunlight. "The bullet passed through," he announced after a moment, and there was relief in his tone. "Clean wound. You were very lucky, miss, a few inches to the right and—" He did not finish the sentence, but Elena understood well enough. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice shakier than she would have liked. "You saved my life." "Those men had no honor," he replied, his jaw tightening. "They were shooting at anyone who moved, including women. That is not the way of things, not even in this wild country." He pulled a bandana from his pocket, surprisingly clean, and pressed it against her wound. "Hold this here. We need to get you to the doctor." Before Elena could protest, he slipped one arm behind her back and the other under her knees, lifting her as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. She gasped, both from the sudden movement and from the solid warmth of his body against hers. Through his shirt, she could feel the hard muscle of his chest and arms, the steady beating of his heart. He smelled of pine and leather and wood smoke, scents that were entirely foreign to her life in town but somehow comforting. "I can walk," she protested weakly, but even as she said it, she knew it was not entirely true. Her legs felt like water and the edges of her vision were starting to blur. "No need," he said simply, and began striding down the street toward the doctor's office. People were emerging from buildings now, cautious and wide-eyed, staring at the mountain man carrying his burden. Elena saw Mrs. Henderson from the general store, young Billy Thompson who worked at the livery, and old Mr. Chen who ran the laundry. Their faces were a mixture of relief and curiosity. The doctor, a thin man named Arthur Prescott, met them at the door of his office. He took one look at Elena's shoulder and ushered them inside immediately. "Put her on the table there," he instructed, and the mountain man complied, setting Elena down with the same care he had shown throughout. Dr. Prescott began examining the wound, and Elena bit her lip against the pain as he cleaned it with what felt like liquid fire. The mountain man had stepped back, but he had not left. He stood near the door, his rifle still in hand, those gray eyes watching with an intensity that Elena found both unnerving and strangely comforting. "Mr. Young here is right," the doctor said as he worked. "Clean pass-through, no major damage. You will have a scar, but you will heal just fine with proper care. You are a very fortunate young woman, Miss Baker." "Mr. Young," Elena repeated, looking at her rescuer. The mountain man inclined his head slightly. "Xander Young," he said. "I came down from the high country to trade furs and resupply. I did not expect to find a gunfight in the middle of the street." "Neither did I," Elena replied, and despite everything, she found herself almost smiling. "I was just fetching supplies." Dr. Prescott bandaged her shoulder efficiently, his movements practiced and sure. "You will need to keep this clean and change the dressing twice a day," he instructed. "Come back in 3 days so I can check for infection. And take it easy. No heavy lifting or strenuous activity for at least a week." Elena nodded, though she had no idea how she would manage that. She lived alone in a small house on the edge of town, supporting herself by taking in sewing and mending. Heavy lifting and strenuous activity were part of her daily existence, but those were concerns for later. Right now, she was simply grateful to be alive. Xander Young stepped forward as she slid off the examination table, his hand hovering near her good elbow as if ready to steady her if she wobbled. "Where do you live, Miss Baker? I will walk you home." "That is not necessary," Elena began, but the look in his eyes stopped her. It was not harsh, but it was firm. This was a man accustomed to making decisions and seeing them through. "Those outlaws may return," he said quietly, "or they may have friends. Until the sheriff has dealt with the situation, it is not safe for you to be alone." He had a point, and Elena found she did not have the energy to argue. "I live on Maple Street," she said. "The small blue house near the end." Xander nodded and offered her his arm. Elena took it, feeling the solid strength beneath her fingers, and they stepped out into the afternoon sunlight. The street was busier now as people cleaned up the aftermath of the attack. The sheriff, a competent man named Tom Garrison, was organizing a posse to track the outlaws. He caught sight of Xander and called out, "Young, good shooting back there. You interested in riding with us?" Xander glanced at Elena, then back at the sheriff. "No," he said simply. "I have other responsibilities at the moment." Sheriff Garrison looked at Elena and understanding crossed his face. "Fair enough. We will handle it from here. Miss Baker, glad to see you are all right." They walked slowly through town, Xander matching his pace to Elena's more tentative steps. She was acutely aware of the curious glances they received, aware of how strange they must look together. She in her worn dress and patched shawl, he in his buckskins and moccasins, a figure from the wild mountains walking through the streets of civilization. But there was also something right about it, something that made Elena's heart beat faster in a way that had nothing to do with her injury. "You live alone?" Xander asked as they turned onto Maple Street. "Yes," Elena replied. "I have for 3 years now since my father died. I support myself with sewing." He was quiet for a moment and Elena could almost hear him thinking. "That is a hard life for a woman alone," he said finally. "It is the life I have," Elena said, perhaps more sharply than she intended. She had spent years proving that she could survive on her own, that she did not need anyone, and she was not about to apologize for it now. But Xander did not seem offended. If anything, there was approval in his expression. "You have strength," he observed. "That is good. The West does not tolerate weakness." They reached her house, and Elena fumbled for her key with her good hand. Xander gently took it from her and unlocked the door, pushing it open and stepping inside first. His eyes swept the small interior, checking corners and shadows with the automatic wariness of a man used to danger. Only when he was satisfied that all was safe did he step aside to let her enter. The house was tiny, just 2 rooms and a small kitchen, but Elena kept it scrupulously clean and as comfortable as her limited means allowed. There was a rocking chair by the fireplace, a table with 2 chairs, and in the corner, her sewing basket and the frame where she stretched fabric to work on. Everything was neat and ordered, a small oasis of control in a chaotic world. Xander's gaze lingered on the sewing corner, on the careful stitches visible in the shirt stretched on the frame. "You do good work," he said. "Thank you." Elena moved toward the rocking chair, suddenly exhausted. The events of the day were catching up with her, and her shoulder throbbed with a deep, persistent ache. "I appreciate everything you did today, Mr. Young. You saved my life, and I will not forget it." He turned to face her fully, and there was something in his expression that Elena could not quite read. "You said today is your birthday," he said, and it was not a question. Elena blinked in surprise. "I did not say that." "No, but I heard you speak to yourself when you were behind the wagon. You said something about dying on your birthday being ironic." Heat crept into Elena's cheeks. She had not realized she had spoken aloud. "Oh, yes, I suppose I did. Today is my birthday. 23 years old." She tried to make her voice light, dismissive, but something in his intent gaze made it difficult. "And you have no celebration planned?" Xander asked. "No cake, no gathering of friends," Elena laughed, and it came out more bitter than she intended. "I have never had a birthday celebration, Mr. Young. When I was a child, my parents did not believe in such frivolity. After my mother died when I was 12, my father was too busy drinking away what little money we had to care about birthdays. It is just another day." But even as she said it, Elena knew it was not entirely true. There was a part of her, buried deep and carefully ignored, that had always wondered what it would be like to have someone care enough to mark the day of her birth. To have a cake with candles, to receive a gift chosen with thought, to hear someone say that they were glad she existed. She had long ago told herself that such things were foolish dreams, the province of children and the fortunate, but the longing had never entirely disappeared. Xander was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes studying her with an intensity that made Elena want to look away. Finally, he spoke. "That is not right," he said, and there was conviction in his voice. "Everyone deserves to be celebrated at least once." "It is kind of you to say so," Elena began, but he held up a hand. "I am not being kind, I am stating a fact." He glanced out the window, gauging the position of the sun. "It is still early afternoon. Your birthday is not over yet." Elena stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Xander said, a hint of something that might have been a smile touching his lips, "that you are going to have a proper birthday celebration. Today. Your first one." Before Elena could respond, before she could explain all the reasons why that was impossible and unnecessary and frankly absurd, Xander Young had turned and walked out the door, closing it softly behind him. She sat in her rocking chair, stunned, her good hand pressed to her chest where her heart was beating far too fast. What had just happened? What did he mean by a proper birthday celebration? And why did the thought of it fill her with equal parts terror and desperate hope? Outside, she heard his boots on the wooden porch, and then the sound of him settling against the wall. He was not leaving. He was standing guard, making sure she was safe. The realization sent a wave of warmth through Elena's chest, a feeling so unfamiliar she almost did not recognize it. When was the last time someone had cared about her safety? When was the last time anyone had cared about her at all? Elena closed her eyes and leaned back in the chair, suddenly overwhelmed. She told herself it was just the shock of being shot, the lingering fear and adrenaline, but she knew that was not entirely true. Something had shifted today, something fundamental. A man built of muscle and mountain had crashed into her carefully ordered life, and Elena had the unsettling feeling that nothing would ever be quite the same again. She must have dozed off despite herself, because the next thing she knew, there was a gentle knock at the door. Elena opened her eyes, disoriented, and called out, "Come in." Xander entered, and he was not alone. He was carrying a basket, and behind him came Mrs. Henderson from the general store, her arms full of packages, and Sally Reeves, the young woman who helped at the bakery, carrying something wrapped in a clean cloth. Elena started to rise, but Xander shook his head. "Stay seated," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "You need to rest that shoulder." Mrs. Henderson, a plump woman with kind eyes and graying hair, bustled forward with a smile. "Miss Baker, Mr. Young here told us what happened, and about it being your birthday. We could not let such an occasion pass unmarked, especially after what you went through today." Elena felt her throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "You did not have to do this," she managed to say. "Nonsense," Mrs. Henderson replied briskly. "Everyone deserves a proper birthday. Now, I have brought some ham and fresh bread and some of that cheese you like. Sally has something special from the bakery." Sally stepped forward shyly. She was only 17, a sweet girl with blonde braids and a perpetual smile. "I made you a cake," she said, and carefully unwrapped the cloth to reveal a small but perfectly formed cake, its white frosting gleaming in the late afternoon light. "It is not fancy, just vanilla, but I hope you like it." Elena stared at the cake and, to her horror, felt tears welling in her eyes. She had seen cakes before, of course, in bakery windows and at other people's celebrations, but never had one been made for her. The simple beauty of it, the care evident in every swirl of frosting, was almost more than she could bear. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you." Xander had been watching her closely, and something in his expression softened even further. He set his basket on the table and began unpacking it, revealing tin plates and cups, a bottle of apple cider, and a handful of wildflowers that he must have gathered from the meadows outside town. The flowers were simple, daisies and black-eyed Susans, but they added a splash of color to the small room. "I did not know which were your favorites," he said, arranging the flowers in a jar he filled with water from her pump. "But these were growing near where my camp is." "They are perfect," Elena said, and meant it. She watched as Mrs. Henderson and Sally helped Xander set out the food, transforming her plain table into something almost festive. The ham was sliced thick, the bread still warm, the cheese rich and creamy. There were pickles and preserves, fresh apples, and even a small jar of honey. "This is too much," Elena protested weakly, but Mrs. Henderson waved her objection away. "Hush now. You just sit there and let us take care of things. Mr. Young has already paid for everything, very generously I might add, and it is our pleasure to help celebrate your birthday properly." Elena's eyes flew to Xander, who was carefully not looking at her. "You did not have to do that," she said. "I wanted to," he replied simply, and the quiet certainty in his voice made further protest impossible. Mrs. Henderson and Sally stayed long enough to make sure everything was arranged to their satisfaction, then made their excuses and departed, though not before Mrs. Henderson gave Elena a significant look and a small wink. Elena felt her cheeks heat again. Was the whole town going to get the wrong idea about her and Xander Young? Or perhaps a small voice in her head whispered it was not the wrong idea at all. When they were alone, Xander pulled out one of the chairs and gestured for Elena to sit at the table. She obeyed, still feeling dreamlike and overwhelmed. He took the other chair, and for a moment they simply looked at each other across the modest spread of food. In the golden light filtering through her window, Xander looked less wild, though no less powerful. His gray eyes were warm, and there was a gentleness in his scarred features that made Elena's heart skip. "I do not know what to say," Elena admitted. "No one has ever done anything like this for me before." "Then say nothing," Xander replied. "Just eat and let yourself enjoy it. That is what birthdays are for." They filled their plates, and Elena discovered she was ravenous. The fear and blood loss had left her shaky and weak, but the good food helped restore some of her strength. Xander ate, with the efficiency of a man used to taking meals where and when he could, but his manners were not crude. He ate neatly, and he watched Elena with an attention that should have been unnerving but was somehow comforting instead. "Tell me about your life in the mountains," Elena said after a while, curious about this man who had appeared from nowhere to save her life and give her an unexpected gift. "You said you came down to trade furs," Xander nodded. "I have a cabin about 15 miles north of here, high up in the timber. I trap in winter, hunt year-round, and come to town maybe 3 or 4 times a year for supplies I cannot make or find myself. It is a solitary life, but it suits me." "Do you not get lonely?" Elena asked, then immediately regretted the question. It was too personal, too prying. But Xander did not seem offended. He was quiet for a moment, considering his words. "Sometimes," he admitted. "There are nights when the silence is too loud, when the mountains feel empty instead of peaceful. But I have lived alone for so long now that I do not know if I could live any other way." "How long?" Elena asked softly. 8 years, Xander said, "since I was 25. Before that, I worked as a guide for wagon trains and hunting parties. Before that." He trailed off, and something dark passed across his face. "Before that, I was someone else entirely, someone I do not care to remember." Elena understood about running from the past. She had spent her whole life trying to escape the shadow of her father's failures, his drinking, his rages, the poverty that had defined her childhood. I think we all have parts of ourselves we would rather leave behind, she said. Xander met her eyes, and there was recognition there, a sense of shared understanding. Yes, he said quietly. I think we do. They talked as they ate, the conversation flowing more easily than Elena would have expected. Xander asked about her sewing, and she found herself telling him about the various projects she took on, the wedding dresses and fancy shirts, the quilts and curtains. She told him about the satisfaction of seeing something come together under her hands, of creating beauty and utility from simple cloth. He listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he understood the skill and artistry involved. In turn, he told her about the mountains, about the elk that bugled in the fall and the wolves that sang in winter. He described the way dawn looked from his cabin, the peaks turning gold and pink as the sun rose. He spoke of tracking bears through deep snow, of finding hidden meadows full of wildflowers in summer, of the fierce satisfaction of living by his own strength and skill. As he spoke, his whole demeanor changed. The careful guardedness eased, and Elena glimpsed the man beneath the hardened exterior, someone who loved the wild places with a poet's heart. When they had eaten their fill, Xander carefully placed the cake in front of Elena. He had somehow procured candles, 3 slender white tapers which he stuck into the frosting and lit with a match. The small flames flickered gently, casting dancing shadows across the table. "Make a wish," Xander said. Elena looked at the cake, at the candles burning bright, and felt emotion well up in her chest again. What did she wish for? A life less hard, security and comfort, love. She closed her eyes and made her wish silently, then opened them and blew out the candles in one breath. Xander was watching her with an expression that made her heart race. "What did you wish for?" he asked. "I cannot tell you," Elena replied, managing a smile, "or it will not come true." "Fair enough." He cut 2 generous slices of cake and handed one to Elena. She took a bite, and the sweet vanilla flavor exploded on her tongue. It was delicious, light and perfect, and she could not help the small sound of pleasure that escaped her. "Good?" Xander asked, and there was something almost tender in his voice. "Wonderful," Elena confirmed. "I had no idea cake could taste like this." They ate their cake in companionable silence, and as the last of the daylight faded from the windows, Xander lit the lamp on Elena's table. The warm glow filled the small house, making it feel cozy and safe. Elena realized with a start that she had not felt this content, this genuinely at peace, in longer than she could remember. For once, she was not thinking about the next day's work or worrying about money or dwelling on the lonely years stretching ahead. She was simply here in this moment, with this unexpected man who had given her a gift beyond price. "Thank you," Elena said when they had finished. "This was the most wonderful birthday I could have imagined." Xander stood and began clearing the table, and Elena rose to help him despite the protesting throb in her shoulder. Together, they put away the leftover food and washed the dishes in her small basin. It was strangely intimate, working side by side in the small kitchen, their hands occasionally brushing as they passed plates and cups. Elena was intensely aware of his presence, of his size and warmth, of the careful way he moved to avoid crowding her. When everything was clean and put away, Xander retrieved something from his coat pocket. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with a leather cord. He held it out to Elena with an expression that might have been shy if such a word could apply to a man of his size and bearing. "This is for you," he said. "A proper birthday gift." Elena took the package with trembling hands. "You have already given me so much," she protested. "Just open it," Xander said. She untied the cord and carefully unwrapped the paper. Inside was a knife, but not just any knife. The blade was about 4 inches long, beautifully made and sharp as a razor. The handle was carved bone, worked with an intricate pattern of mountains and pine trees. It was a work of art as much as a tool, clearly made by someone with great skill. "I made it myself," Xander explained. "The blade is from steel I traded for last year, and I carved the handle over the winter. I was going to sell it or trade it in town, but I want you to have it. A woman living alone needs a way to protect herself." Elena ran her fingers over the carved handle, marveling at the detail. She could see each individual tree, each peak and valley of the mountain range. It must have taken hours of painstaking work. "This is too valuable," she said, though she could not bear the thought of giving it back. "It is yours," Xander said firmly. "Please. It would give me peace of mind to know you have it." Elena looked up at him, at this man who was still essentially a stranger but who had shown her more kindness in one afternoon than most people had in her entire life. "I will treasure it always," she said, and meant it with her whole heart. Xander smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face. It softened the hard lines, lit up his eyes, and made him look younger and more approachable. Elena's breath caught. He was handsome in a rough, powerful way, but when he smiled, he was beautiful. "Good," he said simply. The moment stretched between them, charged with something Elena could not name but felt in every nerve. They were standing very close, close enough that she could see the rise and fall of his chest, count the threads of silver in his dark hair. His eyes were locked on hers, and she saw something in them that made her pulse race. Longing, tenderness, possibility. Then Xander took a deliberate step back, breaking the spell. "It is late," he said, his voice slightly rough. "You need to rest and let your shoulder heal. I should go." "Where will you stay?" Elena asked, trying to hide her disappointment. "I have a camp outside town," Xander replied. "I prefer sleeping under the stars to paying for a hotel room. I will be comfortable enough." "Will I see you again?" The question slipped out before Elena could stop it, and she felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment at her own forwardness. But Xander did not seem to mind. His expression was warm as he said, "Yes, I will check on you tomorrow, make sure your wound is healing properly. And the day after that, I will walk you to the doctor so he can examine it. I am not leaving town until I know you are truly all right." Relief and something sweeter flooded through Elena. "I would like that," she said softly. Xander moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. "Happy birthday, Elena," he said, using her first name for the first time. The sound of it on his lips sent a shiver through her. "I am very glad you are alive to celebrate it." "So am I," Elena whispered. "Thanks to you." He gave her one more smile, then slipped out into the night. Elena stood in her small house, surrounded by the remnants of her first real birthday celebration, and pressed her hand to her heart. Something fundamental had shifted today. She had been saved, celebrated, and seen in a way she never had before. And the man who had done all of it was unlike anyone she had ever met. She looked down at the knife in her hands, at the lovingly carved mountains and trees, and knew with sudden certainty that this was the beginning of something. What that something was, she could not yet say, but she felt it in her bones. Xander Young had walked into her life today, and Elena suspected that when he eventually walked out of it, nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, Elena woke to sunlight streaming through her windows and a deep, persistent ache in her shoulder. For a moment she lay still, remembering the previous day like a strange dream. The gunfight, the mountain man, the birthday celebration. It had all really happened. She touched her bandaged shoulder gingerly, feeling the pull of stitches beneath the cloth, and knew it was real. She rose carefully, mindful of the doctor's instructions, and dressed in a simple brown dress that buttoned up the front so she would not have to raise her arm too high. The knife Xander had given her lay on her bedside table, and she picked it up, turning it over in her hands. It was even more beautiful in the morning light, the carving on the handle showing incredible detail and artistry. She slipped it into her pocket, liking the solid weight of it against her leg. There was work to be done. She had 3 shirts to finish for Mr. Peterson, the banker, and a dress hem that needed completion for young Mary Atkins. But when Elena tried to thread her needle, her hands shook too badly from residual shock and weakness. The thread kept missing the eye, and after the 5th attempt, she set the needle down with a frustrated sigh. A knock at the door made her jump. Elena rose and opened it to find Xander standing on her small porch, his broad shoulders blocking most of the morning sun. He was dressed as he had been yesterday, in buckskins and a dark shirt, his long hair tied back with a leather cord. In his hands he carried another basket. "Good morning," he said, his gray eyes scanning her face intently. "How are you feeling?" "Sore," Elena admitted, "and a bit shaky, but alive, which is what matters. May I come in?" Elena stepped aside and Xander entered, setting the basket on her table. "I brought breakfast," he said. "Fresh eggs, bacon, and biscuits from the hotel restaurant. I thought you might not feel up to cooking." He was right, of course. The thought of trying to manage a skillet and cookstove one-handed was daunting. "You are very thoughtful," Elena said, and meant it. They ate together at her small table, and Elena found herself relaxing into his presence. There was something soothing about Xander, despite his size and obvious capability for violence. He moved carefully in her small space, mindful of his strength. When he poured her coffee, his hands were gentle. When he spoke, his voice was low and calm. He asked how she had slept, if she needed anything, if her shoulder was hurting too badly. "I have some willow bark tea if the pain is bad," he offered. "It helps with inflammation and aching." "You know herbs?" Elena asked, surprised. "You learn a lot living alone in the mountains," Xander said with a slight smile. "If I get sick or injured, there is no doctor to run to. I have to know how to take care of myself. Willow bark for pain, yarrow to stop bleeding, wild garlic for infections. The mountains teach you what you need to know if you pay attention." After breakfast, Xander noticed Elena's abandoned sewing. "You were trying to work?" he asked, and there was gentle disapproval in his tone. "I have commissions to finish," Elena explained. "I cannot afford to fall behind." "You were shot yesterday," Xander pointed out. "Surely people will understand if you need a few days to recover." "Perhaps," Elena said doubtfully, "but I still need to eat and rent does not pay itself." Xander was quiet for a moment, studying the shirts she had been working on. "What needs to be done?" he asked. "Just buttons and finishing the cuffs," Elena said, "but I can manage. My left hand still works, even if my right shoulder is a bit stiff." "Show me," Xander said. "What?" "Show me how to sew on buttons. I can do the work while you supervise. That way the job gets done and you do not stress your injury." Elena stared at him. "You want to sew buttons? Why not?" Xander raised an eyebrow. "I have sewn plenty of seams in my life, patching clothes and making repairs. Buttons cannot be that different." Elena found herself smiling despite her surprise. The image of this massive mountain man carefully sewing buttons was almost comical, but there was no mockery in his offer. He genuinely wanted to help. "All right," she said. "I will teach you." For the next hour, Elena sat in her rocking chair and instructed Xander on the finer points of attaching buttons. He was surprisingly good at it once he got the hang of the technique. His large hands, which seemed built for holding rifles and axes, proved capable of surprising delicacy. He threaded the needle with focus and stitched the buttons on with neat, even strokes. His tongue poked out slightly between his lips as he concentrated, and Elena found the expression endearing. "You are a natural," she said after he finished the 3rd button perfectly. "I am motivated," Xander replied. "I do not like seeing you strain yourself when I can help." They worked together companionably, Elena directing and Xander executing. He asked questions about the sewing business, about how she had learned the trade, what kinds of commissions she typically received. Elena found herself telling him things she had not shared with anyone, about her dreams of one day having a real shop instead of working from her tiny house, about the satisfaction of creating beautiful garments, about the frustration of never having quite enough money to feel secure. "It is a hard life," she concluded, "but it is mine, and I have made it work." "You are strong," Xander said, and there was admiration in his voice. "Stronger than you probably realize. Most people would have crumbled under the weight you have carried." The compliment warmed Elena more than it should have. She was not used to being seen, truly seen, by anyone. Most people in town knew her only as the quiet seamstress, the poor girl whose father drank himself to death. They did not see her struggles or her triumphs, her fears or her small victories. But Xander saw. In just a day, he seemed to understand her in a way no one else ever had. By noon, the shirts were finished. Xander held them up for inspection, and Elena had to admit they were well done. No one would guess that the final buttons had been sewn by a mountain man instead of a seamstress. "Thank you," Elena said. "You have saved me hours of work and probably prevented my shoulder from getting worse." "It was my pleasure," Xander replied. "What else needs doing?" "Nothing that cannot wait until I am more healed," Elena assured him. "Then let me check your bandage," Xander said. "I want to make sure it is still clean." Elena hesitated, then nodded. Xander moved behind her chair and gently undid the buttons at the neck of her dress, just enough to expose her shoulder. His fingers were warm against her skin as he carefully peeled back the bandage. Elena shivered, but not from pain. "It looks good," Xander said after a moment. "No redness, no signs of infection. The stitches are holding well. Dr. Prescott does good work." He rebandaged the wound with supplies from his ever-present pack, his touch gentle and sure. When he was done, he carefully buttoned her dress again, his knuckles grazing the nape of her neck. Elena felt heat spread through her body at the innocent contact, a warmth that had nothing to do with fever and everything to do with the man standing so close behind her. "There," Xander said, stepping back. "All done." The afternoon passed in quiet conversation. Xander seemed in no hurry to leave, and Elena did not want him to go. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories and observations. Elena learned that Xander had been born in Virginia, that he had come west after the war, that he had spent years drifting before finally settling in the mountains of Montana. He learned that Elena had lived her entire life in Fort Benton, that her mother had been a skilled seamstress who taught her the trade before dying of pneumonia, that her father had been a blacksmith before drink ruined him. "You have never wanted to leave?" Xander asked. "To see what else is out there." "Sometimes," Elena admitted. "But leaving takes money, and money is something I have never had enough of. Besides, where would I go? At least here I have a trade and a place to live, even if neither is ideal." "You could go anywhere you wanted," Xander said quietly. "With your skills, you could set up shop in any town. Or you could go to a big city like San Francisco or Denver, work for an established dressmaker and learn even more of the trade." "That sounds like a dream," Elena said wistfully. "But dreams do not pay bills or put food on the table." "I learned a long time ago to be practical rather than hopeful." Something shifted in Xander's expression. "Maybe you have been alone for too long," he said. "Maybe you have forgotten that dreams can become real if you have help reaching them." Elena did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. But the words lingered in her mind, tantalizing and dangerous. What if she did not have to be alone anymore? What if she could reach for something more than mere survival? As evening approached, Xander prepared to leave. "I will come by tomorrow morning," he said. "The day after that, we will go see Dr. Prescott together." "You do not have to keep checking on me," Elena said, though the protest was half-hearted. "I am sure you have better things to do." "There is nothing more important than making sure you are safe and healing properly," Xander replied with a firmness that made her heart flutter. "I will see you tomorrow, Elena." He left, and Elena stood at her window watching his broad back disappear down the street. What was happening between them? It felt like something significant, something that could change everything, but Elena was afraid to name it, afraid that giving it a name would make it too real and therefore too easily broken. The next 3 days followed a similar pattern. Xander arrived each morning with food and stayed through much of the day, helping with her work and keeping her company. He finished the dress hem she had been working on, proving that his sewing skills extended beyond just buttons. He fixed a loose board on her porch, replaced a broken window pane, and chopped enough firewood to last her through the coming winter. He moved through her small world like a force of nature, addressing problems and easing burdens she had carried alone for so long. But more than the practical help, Elena treasured his companionship. They talked for hours, about everything from philosophy to recipes, from politics to poetry. She discovered that Xander was widely read, that he carried books in his saddlebags and spent long winter nights reading by firelight. He had opinions on Shakespeare and Whitman, on the state of the nation and the future of the frontier. He made her laugh with stories of mishaps in the mountains, of close calls with bears, and the time he accidentally fell in a river while tracking an elk. Elena found herself opening up in ways she never had before. She told him about her loneliness, about the weight of living with no one to rely on. She confessed her fears about growing old alone, about what would happen if she became too sick or injured to work. She shared dreams she had never spoken aloud, about having a real shop with a painted sign, about making dresses for wealthy clients, about maybe one day having enough money to feel truly secure. Xander listened to all of it with patient attention. He did not dismiss her fears or tell her she was being foolish. Instead, he validated her feelings while gently suggesting that perhaps things did not have to stay as they were. That change was possible, that she deserved more than the hard life she had carved out for herself. On the 3rd day, they walked together to Dr. Prescott's office. The doctor examined Elena's shoulder and pronounced himself pleased with her progress. "Healing nicely," he said. "Keep it clean and try not to strain it for another few days, but you should be back to normal soon." "You were very lucky, Miss Baker." As they walked back to her house, Elena felt a strange sadness settling over her. Her shoulder was healing. Soon there would be no medical reason for Xander to keep checking on her, and once she was fully recovered, what excuse would he have to keep visiting? He would go back to his mountain cabin, back to his solitary life, and she would return to her quiet existence of sewing and surviving. The thought was almost unbearable. They reached her door, and Xander paused before leaving. "Elena," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up sharply. "I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" He was quiet for a long moment, seeming to struggle with himself. Finally, he said, "I came to town planning to stay only a day or two. I needed supplies, and then I was going to head back to the high country before the summer heat got too intense. But that was before I met you, before I spent these days with you." "Xander," Elena whispered, not sure what she was asking for but needing something. "I do not want to leave," he said bluntly. "Or rather, I do not want to leave without you. These days with you have been the best I have had in 8 years, maybe longer. You make me want things I convinced myself I did not need anymore: company, conversation, connection. Elena's breath caught. What are you saying? I am saying that I care about you, Xander said, his gray eyes intense. More than I probably should after only a few days. I am saying that the thought of going back to my cabin alone, of never seeing you again, is like a knife to the gut. I am saying that I want more time with you if you will have me. I will have you, Elena said without hesitation, surprising herself with her boldness. I want more time too. These have been the happiest days of my life, Xander. When I am with you, I feel seen and valued in a way I never have before. The thought of you leaving. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Then I am not going anywhere, Xander said firmly. Not yet. Not until we figure out what this is between us. Elena took a step closer to him, emboldened by his confession. I think I already know what it is, she said softly. I think it is the beginning of love. Xander's eyes widened, and then he was smiling, that transformative smile that made him beautiful. Yes, he said. I think you are right. He reached out and cupped her face in his large, calloused hand. Elena leaned into the touch, her eyes fluttering closed. When she opened them again, Xander was closer, so close she could feel his breath on her face. He gave her time to pull away, to refuse, but Elena did neither. Instead, she tilted her face up in invitation. Xander kissed her gently, as if she were something precious and fragile. His lips were warm and surprisingly soft against hers. The kiss was tender and sweet, full of promise and possibility. Elena felt like her heart might burst from the sheer joy of it. This man, this strong, kind, unexpected man, cared for her, wanted her, chose her. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Xander rested his forehead against hers, his hands gentle on her waist. I am not good at pretty words, he said quietly, but I want you to know that you have become important to me, Elena Baker, more important than anyone has been in a very long time. You are important to me too, Elena replied, her voice thick with emotion. You gave me my first birthday celebration. You made me feel valued and cared for. You showed me what it could be like to not be alone. I do not want to lose that. I do not want to lose you. You will not, Xander promised. I am not going anywhere. Over the following weeks, Xander remained in Fort Benton, and a courtship began unlike any Elena had imagined. It was not the formal, civilized courtship of parlor visits and chaperoned walks. Instead, it was raw and real and perfectly suited to both of them. Xander took her into the foothills, teaching her to identify edible plants and medicinal herbs. He showed her how to track animals, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to move silently through the forest. In turn, Elena shared her world with him, introducing him to the rhythms of town life, the web of social connections and obligations. They spent every possible moment together, and the town took notice. There was gossip, of course, but it was mostly benign. People remembered how Xander had saved Elena during the gunfight, and they could see the genuine affection between the unlikely pair. Mrs. Henderson smiled knowingly whenever she saw them together. Even Dr. Prescott remarked that love seemed to be doing more for Elena's recovery than any medicine. Elena's shoulder healed completely, the scar a thin white line that Xander traced with gentle fingers when they lay together in the meadow grass outside town, carefully proper but deeply connected. They talked about everything, sharing their pasts and their dreams for the future. Xander told her about the loneliness of the mountains, how it had felt safe for so long but now felt like a prison. Elena told him about the loneliness of town, how she could be surrounded by people and still feel utterly alone. We could cure each other's loneliness, Xander suggested one afternoon as they sat by a creek, watching the water flow over smooth stones. If you were willing to take a chance on a mountain man. Elena turned to look at him, her heart racing. "What are you asking me?" Xander took her hand, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles. "I am asking if you would consider leaving town, coming to live with me in the mountains. Not right away," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "I know it is a big decision. But maybe you could visit first, see if you could tolerate the isolation, see if you could tolerate me for more than a few hours at a time." "I could tolerate you forever," Elena said, and was rewarded with one of his beautiful smiles. "Is that a yes?" he asked. "It is a maybe," Elena replied honestly. "I would need to think about it to understand what I would be giving up and what I would be gaining. But I am not saying no, Xander. I am saying let me see your world before I commit to joining it permanently." "That is fair," Xander agreed. "More than fair. Will you come up to my cabin? Spend a few days there. I promise to be a perfect gentleman." Elena agreed, and 2 days later they set out on horseback into the mountains. Xander had purchased a gentle mare for Elena, and she proved to be a capable rider despite limited experience. They climbed steadily through pine forests and rocky meadows, leaving civilization behind. The air grew cooler and cleaner, scented with evergreen and wildflowers. Eagles soared overhead, and once they glimpsed a small herd of elk moving through a distant valley. Xander's cabin was located in a high mountain basin, surrounded by towering peaks and thick timber. It was larger than Elena had expected, solidly built of hewn logs with a stone fireplace and real glass windows. Inside, it was neat and surprisingly comfortable. There was a large bed with a thick bearskin cover, a sturdy table and chairs, shelves lined with books and supplies. One wall was hung with furs and pelts, another with various tools and weapons. It was clearly the home of a capable, organized man, not the rough shelter she had half expected. "It is wonderful," Elena breathed, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "It is home," Xander said simply. "Or it has been. But lately it has felt incomplete, like something essential is missing." He showed her around the property, pointing out the stream that provided fresh water, the garden plot where he grew vegetables in summer, the shed where he stored meat and worked on pelts. He introduced her to his horse, a sturdy roan gelding named Ironwood, and showed her the trail that led to a high meadow where deer often grazed. That night, they sat by the fire and Xander cooked dinner, a hearty stew of venison and vegetables. Elena watched him move around his kitchen with easy competence, and she could picture herself here, sharing this space and this life. It would be hard, certainly. The isolation would be challenging, especially in winter when they might go months without seeing another soul. But the peace was seductive, the beauty overwhelming, and more than that, the thought of sharing it all with Xander, of building a life together in this wild place, filled her with longing. "Tell me honestly," Elena said as they ate, "would you be happy if I was here all the time? Would I disrupt your life too much?" Xander set down his spoon and looked at her intently. "Elena, you have already disrupted my life completely. Before I met you, I was content with my solitude. Now, every time I imagine returning here alone, I feel empty. You would not be disrupting my life. You would be completing it." "But what would I do here?" Elena asked. "I am a seamstress. There is no one to sew for in the mountains." "You could still sew," Xander pointed out. "You could make things for trade when we go to town, or you could learn new skills, tanning, beadwork, herb lore. Or you could do nothing but read and relax and let yourself be cared for. The point is not what you do, Elena. The point is that we would be together." Elena was quiet for a long time, thinking. Finally, she said, "Can I ask you something? Why me? You could have any woman in Fort Benton, probably any woman in Montana. Why would you want someone like me, with no family, no money, nothing to offer?" Xander reached across the table and took her hand. "You have everything to offer," he said fiercely. "You have strength and courage. You have survived things that would have broken most people. You have a kind heart despite every reason to be bitter. You make me laugh. You make me think. You make me want to be better than I am. That is why you, Elena, not despite who you are, but because of who you are." Tears pricked Elena's eyes. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. No one had ever seen her value so clearly or stated it so plainly. "I love you," she whispered. "I did not plan to, and I certainly did not expect to, but I do. I love you, Xander Young." "I love you too," Xander replied, his voice rough with emotion. "So much it terrifies me. I have been alone for so long that I forgot what it felt like to need someone. But I need you, Elena. I need you like I need air and water." That night, they lay together in Xander's big bed, holding each other close. It was innocent, or as innocent as two people deeply in love could be, but it felt momentous. This was a claiming, a promise. When Elena finally fell asleep with her head on Xander's broad chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, she knew she had found her home. Over the next few days, Elena explored the mountains with Xander as her guide. He showed her hidden valleys and crystal-clear lakes, taught her to identify animal tracks and bird calls. They picked wild berries and gathered herbs for tea. They swam in a cold mountain stream and lay on sun-warmed rocks to dry. They talked and laughed and kissed under the vast blue sky. Elena discovered that she loved the mountains almost as much as Xander did. The silence was not oppressive but freeing. The beauty was overwhelming. And the sense of peace, of being far from the judgment and expectations of town life, was intoxicating. She could be completely herself here, without pretense or apology. On the fourth day, as they sat on a high ridge watching the sunset paint the peaks gold and crimson, Elena made her decision. "I want to stay," she said. "Not just for a visit, I want to live here with you. I want to make this my home." Xander turned to her, his gray eyes searching her face. "Are you certain? I do not want you to regret it later, to feel trapped." "I have never been more certain of anything," Elena replied. "I have spent my whole life feeling trapped, Xander. Trapped by poverty and obligation and loneliness. Here, with you, I feel free. I feel like I can finally breathe." Xander pulled her into his arms and kissed her deeply, a kiss full of joy and promise and fierce possessiveness. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. "Then we should do this properly," Xander said. "I should marry you, make you my wife in truth." "Yes," Elena agreed. "But first we need to go back to Fort Benton. I have things to settle, possessions to pack. And I want to be married in a church, or at least by a proper minister. I want it to be legal and official." "Whatever you want," Xander said. "As long as you are mine at the end of it, I will do anything." They returned to Fort Benton the next day, and Elena set about closing this chapter of her life. She sold most of her furniture, keeping only a few precious items. She completed her outstanding sewing commissions and thanked her clients for their patronage. She paid her final month's rent to her landlord and said goodbye to her neighbors. Mrs. Henderson cried and hugged her tight, making Elena promise to visit whenever they came to town. The wedding was small but meaningful, held in the little white church at the edge of town. Dr. Prescott stood up as a witness, as did Sally from the bakery. The minister, a kind elderly man named Reverend Thompson, performed a simple but heartfelt ceremony. Elena wore a dress she had made herself, pale blue with delicate embroidery. Xander had purchased new clothes for the occasion, black trousers and a white shirt that emphasized his powerful build. He had even trimmed his beard and tied his hair back neatly. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Xander kissed Elena with a tenderness that made her heart ache with happiness. They were married. She was Elena Young now, wife to a mountain man, and about to start a completely new life. They spent one night in Fort Benton's small hotel, and it was their wedding night in every sense. Xander made love to Elena with a combination of fierce passion and exquisite gentleness, cherishing every inch of her. They explored each other's bodies with wonder and delight, learning what brought pleasure, what sparked desire. In Xander's arms, Elena felt beautiful and desired in a way she never had before. He worshipped her with his hands and mouth and body, and she gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, sweaty and sated and deeply content. "I did not know it could be like that," Elena confessed, trailing her fingers over the hard planes of Xander's chest. "Neither did I," Xander admitted. "I have been with women before, but it was never like this. Never so intense or meaningful. Being with you is like coming home, Elena." "I feel the same way," Elena said, snuggling closer. "Like I have finally found where I belong." The next morning, they packed their horses and set out for the mountains. Elena looked back only once at Fort Benton, at the town that had been her whole world for 23 years. She felt a pang of sadness for what she was leaving behind, but it was overshadowed by excitement for what lay ahead. She was starting fresh, with a man who loved her and a life full of possibility. The first year in the mountains was an adjustment. There were definitely challenges. The isolation was sometimes difficult, especially during the long winter when they were snowed in for weeks at a time. Elena had to learn new skills, from tanning hides to preserving meat to managing the sometimes harsh realities of wilderness living. She learned to shoot a rifle competently, in case Xander was ever away and she needed to protect herself or hunt for food. She learned to read the weather and predict storms, to identify poisonous plants and healing herbs. But the rewards far outweighed the difficulties. Elena discovered a talent for beadwork and began creating beautiful decorative pieces that Xander could trade in town. She continued to sew, making sturdy wilderness clothing and beautiful quilts. She kept a garden in summer, growing vegetables and flowers. She read voraciously from Xander's extensive book collection and spent long evenings in deep conversation with her husband. Most importantly, she was happy. Truly, deeply happy in a way she had never imagined possible. Xander was an attentive and loving husband, always considerate of her needs and feelings. He never took her for granted or treated her as anything less than an equal partner. They worked together as a team, each contributing their strengths to build their life. And the love between them only deepened with time. The physical passion remained intense, but it was joined by a profound emotional intimacy. They knew each other's thoughts and moods, could communicate with a glance or a touch. They laughed together often, finding joy in small things. They supported each other through difficulties and celebrated each other's successes. When Elena's second birthday as Xander's wife approached, he began acting mysterious. He disappeared for hours at a time, claiming he was checking trap lines or hunting. Elena suspected something was afoot but did not pry. If Xander wanted to surprise her, she would let him. On the morning of her birthday, Elena woke to find Xander already up and dressed. He was grinning, looking pleased with himself. "Happy birthday," he said, kissing her thoroughly. "I have something to show you." He led her outside, and Elena gasped. The small clearing in front of their cabin had been transformed. Colorful bunting hung from the trees, and a table had been set up with a cloth and wildflower centerpiece. But most amazing of all was the cake sitting in the center of the table. It was larger than the one Sally had made 2 years ago, beautifully frosted and decorated with candied flowers. "How did you?" Elena began, but Xander was laughing. "I traded for most of the ingredients over the past few months," he explained. "Flour, sugar, eggs that I kept cold in the stream, and I practiced making cakes in secret when you were busy with other things. This is my 5th attempt, and I think I finally got it right." Elena threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. "It is perfect," she said. "You are perfect. I cannot believe you went to all this trouble." "You deserve a birthday celebration every year," Xander said firmly. "You deserved them all along, but since you did not get them before, I am going to make sure every single one from now on is special." They spent the day in celebration. Xander had even made her gifts, including a beautiful beaded necklace and a new winter coat lined with soft fur. They ate cake for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, laughing at the indulgence. As the sun set and they sat together watching the peaks turn gold, Elena reflected on how much her life had changed in 2 years. "What are you thinking?" Xander asked, his arm around her shoulders. "I am thinking about that first birthday you gave me," Elena said. "How lost and lonely I was, how sure I was that my life would never change. And now look at me. I have a husband I adore, a home I love, a life I never dared dream was possible. It is all because of you, Xander. You changed everything." "We changed everything together," Xander corrected. "You took a chance on me, on this life. That took courage. And you have made this place into a real home, Elena. Before you, this was just a cabin where I slept. Now it is filled with warmth and love and meaning." "You gave me that." "I love you," Elena said simply. "I love you too," Xander replied. "More than I can ever properly express. You are my heart, Elena, my home, my everything." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, and the stars began to appear overhead, countless and brilliant in the clear mountain air. Elena thought about how she had almost died 2 years ago, shot in a random act of violence on what should have been an ordinary day. But that terrible moment had led to this beautiful life, to finding the man who would become her everything. She touched the faint scar on her shoulder, a reminder of that day. It had healed cleanly, leaving only a thin line, much like the emotional scars of her difficult past, had begun to heal in the warmth of Xander's love. She was not the same frightened, lonely woman she had been. She had grown stronger, more confident, more open to joy. As the months passed, Elena and Xander settled into the rhythms of mountain life. They trapped in winter, the cold months spent close to the cabin, working on hides and crafts by firelight. Spring brought the thaw and renewal, with Xander hunting and Elena planting her garden. Summer was spent gathering and preserving food for the coming winter, long days of work rewarded by peaceful evenings. Fall brought the rut, when elk buggled in the valleys and Xander spent long days hunting to fill their meat cache. They made occasional trips to Fort Benton for supplies and to trade Xander's furs and Elena's handiwork. Each time they visited, people remarked on how happy and healthy Elena looked. Mrs. Henderson always hugged her and demanded updates on her life. Dr. Prescott smiled and said mountain living clearly agreed with her. Even those who had barely noticed her before seemed to see her differently now, as if her happiness made her more visible. During one of these trips, nearly 3 years after their wedding, Elena began feeling strangely unwell. She was tired all the time and certain smells made her nauseous. She mentioned it to Xander, who immediately insisted she see Dr. Prescott. The doctor examined her thoroughly, asking questions about her symptoms. Finally, he smiled and said, "Congratulations, Mrs. Young. You are going to have a baby." Elena stared at him in shock, then turned to look at Xander. Her husband's face had gone through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, joy, and finally fierce protectiveness. He pulled Elena into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Elena asked, suddenly uncertain. They had never discussed children, had been content with just each other. "Happy." Xander pulled back to look at her, his gray eyes bright with unshed tears. "Elena, I am overjoyed." "Terrified, but overjoyed. We are going to be parents." The pregnancy changed things, but not in bad ways. Xander became even more attentive and protective, if that was possible. He insisted Elena rest more, that she not lift anything heavy or overexert herself. He took over many of the harder chores and fussed over her constantly. It would have been annoying if it had not been so endearing. As Elena's belly grew, she spent her time preparing for the baby. She sewed tiny clothes and blankets, created a cradle from soft leather and wood that Xander built. She read everything she could find about childbirth and infant care, determined to be prepared. Xander carved toys and added a separate sleeping area to the cabin for when the baby was older. They talked endlessly about their child, wondering if it would be a boy or girl, what they would name it, what kind of person it might become. Xander admitted he was nervous about being a father, worried he would not know how to be gentle enough with something so small and fragile. Elena reassured him, reminding him of the gentleness he showed her every day. "You have the capacity for incredible tenderness," she told him. "Our child will be lucky to have you as a father." As her due date approached, they made the difficult decision to go down to Fort Benton for the birth. Xander wanted Elena to have proper medical care, just in case anything went wrong. They took a room at the hotel, and Xander hired Mrs. Henderson to stay with Elena during the day when he needed to run errands or handle business. The labor began on a cold February morning. Elena woke to contractions, and Xander immediately went for Dr. Prescott. The doctor arrived quickly, along with Mrs. Henderson, who would serve as midwife. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly a full day. Xander stayed by Elena's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement. Finally, as the sun was setting, their child was born. The baby's cry filled the room, strong and healthy. Dr. Prescott wrapped the infant in a blanket and handed it to Elena. "You have a son," he announced with a smile. Elena looked down at the tiny, red-faced baby in her arms and felt her heart expand to encompass this new person. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and his father's gray eyes. Xander leaned over them both, his large hand cradling the baby's tiny head with infinite care. "He is beautiful," Xander whispered, his voice rough with emotion, "just like his mother." They named him Thomas after Xander's grandfather. He was called Tommy, and he became the center of their world. Xander proved to be a wonderful father, patient and gentle despite his size and strength. He held Tommy for hours, rocking him when he cried, singing soft songs in a language Elena did not understand, but that seemed to soothe the baby. He changed diapers without complaint and took night feedings so Elena could rest. When Tommy was 6 weeks old, they returned to the mountains. Elena had been nervous about bringing such a young baby into the wilderness, but Tommy seemed to thrive there. He was a happy, healthy baby who rarely fussed. As he grew, he developed a love for the mountains that matched his parents. He took his first steps in the meadow behind their cabin, chased butterflies through the wildflowers, and learned to identify animal tracks before he could properly read. The years passed in a blur of happiness. Tommy grew into a bright, curious boy with his father's strength and his mother's quick mind. When he was 4, Elena gave birth to a daughter they named Rose. She had Elena's dark hair and Xander's gray eyes, a beautiful combination that turned heads whenever they visited town. 2 years later came another son, Samuel, who was quieter than his siblings but equally beloved. Their cabin expanded to accommodate the growing family. Xander added rooms, creating spaces for each child. Elena's days were full of cooking and cleaning and caring for children, but she was happier than she had ever imagined possible. Watching Xander with their children, seeing him teach them about the mountains and life and how to be good people, filled her with profound love and gratitude. On Elena's 30th birthday, 7 years after that first celebration, Xander organized a family party. Tommy, now 6, helped his father bake a cake, getting flour everywhere and laughing at the mess. Rose, 4 years old, picked wildflowers and arranged them in jars. Little Samuel, just 2, was content to watch with wide eyes. When Elena woke that morning, the cabin was decorated with flowers and colorful ribbons. The cake sat on the table, slightly lopsided but made with love. Her 3 children rushed to hug her, shouting birthday wishes. And Xander, her beloved husband, pulled her close and kissed her tenderly. "Happy birthday, my love," he said. "I hope it is as wonderful as you deserve." "It already is," Elena replied, looking around at her family, at the home they had built together. "Every day with you is wonderful." They spent the day in celebration, playing games and eating too much cake. That evening, after the children were asleep, Elena and Xander sat on their porch watching the sunset. It had become their tradition, these quiet moments together at the end of the day. "You remember my first birthday?" Elena asked, leaning against Xander's shoulder. "7 years ago, when I thought I was going to die in that gunfight." "I remember every detail," Xander said. "I remember seeing you behind that wagon, bleeding and scared. I remember carrying you to the doctor. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met. I remember you appearing like some kind of hero from a story," Elena said with a smile. "This huge, terrifying, beautiful man who saved my life. I never imagined that a year later we would be married." "Neither did I," Xander admitted, "but I am so grateful it worked out this way." "You have given me everything, Elena. A home, a family, a purpose. Before you, I was just surviving. Now I am truly living." "We gave those things to each other," Elena corrected. "I was just surviving too, barely scraping by and convinced I did not deserve anything better. You showed me I was wrong. You showed me what love could be." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear. Their children slept safely inside, their bellies full and their hearts content. The mountains rose around them, protective and eternal. Everything Elena had never dared dream of had come true, all because a mountain man had cared enough to give her a birthday celebration. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Tommy grew into a strong young man, much like his father, and developed a talent for tracking and hunting. Rose proved to have her mother's skill with needle and thread, creating beautiful embroidered pieces. Samuel became an expert on plants and herbs, able to identify and use hundreds of different species for food and medicine. When Tommy turned 18, he announced he wanted to see more of the world before settling down. Elena's heart clenched at the thought of him leaving, but she understood the need. She and Xander gave him their blessing, along with supplies and hard-earned wisdom. He departed on his horse, promising to return in a year or 2. True to his word, Tommy returned 18 months later with a young woman named Catherine. She was the daughter of a rancher, and she had Tommy's same adventurous spirit. They were clearly in love, and after a short courtship they married. Tommy built a cabin of his own a few miles from his parents, close enough for regular visits but far enough for independence. Rose followed a different path. She loved the mountains but also craved the culture and society of town life. At 19, she moved to Fort Benton and opened a dress shop, using skills her mother had taught her and designs all her own. Her work became famous throughout Montana, and she had clients from as far away as Helena and Butte. She married a kind young lawyer named Daniel, and they had 3 daughters who visited their mountain grandparents every summer. Samuel, the quietest of the 3, remained close to home. He built his cabin near a mountain stream and established himself as a healer, using his knowledge of plants to help settlers and trappers throughout the region. People traveled from far and wide to seek his remedies. He married a Blackfoot woman named Little Dove, and their union bridged 2 worlds, mountain man and indigenous peoples living in harmony and mutual respect. Elena and Xander watched their children's lives unfold with pride and joy. They became grandparents many times over, their cabin often full of visiting grandchildren during summer months. Xander taught the boys to hunt and track, while Elena taught the girls to sew and garden. But really, the children learned from both, because Elena had become as much a part of the mountains as Xander, and he had learned the value of creating beautiful things. On Elena's 50th birthday, the entire family gathered at the mountain cabin for a celebration. It took days of preparation, with children and grandchildren arriving from various locations. The cabin was bursting with people, laughter, and love. A huge cake sat on a specially built table and presents were piled high. As Elena looked around at her family, at the 3 children she had raised and the dozen grandchildren who bore her legacy, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This life, this beautiful, full, joyous life, had started with a mountain man's kindness on what should have been the worst day of her existence. Xander found her standing on the porch, momentarily alone amid the chaos. He was now 61, his dark hair heavily threaded with silver, his beard more gray than brown. But he was still strong and vital, his gray eyes as sharp as ever. He pulled Elena close, and they stood together looking out at the mountains they had called home for nearly 3 decades. "What are you thinking?" Xander asked, the same question he had asked countless times over the years. "I am thinking about that first birthday," Elena said. "About the scared, lonely woman I was, about how you appeared and changed everything. I am thinking about how grateful I am for that gunfight, as terrible as it was, because it brought you into my life." "I am grateful too," Xander said quietly. "Every single day I wake up grateful that I was in Fort Benton that day, grateful that I saw you behind that wagon, grateful that you gave me a chance." "We gave each other a chance," Elena said, echoing words they had spoken many times before. It was their truth, their foundation. They had both been lost, both been alone, both been convinced they did not deserve happiness. And then they had found each other and built something beautiful. Behind them, the cabin door opened and their family spilled out, calling for Elena to come and blow out her candles. She turned to go, but Xander held her back for one more moment. "I love you," he said, his voice low and intense. "More now than even that first day I told you. You are my whole heart, Elena Young, my whole life." "And you are mine," Elena replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him, "now and always." They went back inside to celebrate, surrounded by the family they had created and the love they had built. The cake was delicious, the presents were thoughtful, and the laughter was abundant. As night fell and grandchildren dozed on various laps, Elena found herself thinking once more about that first birthday celebration. The simple cake, the wildflowers, the mountain man who had cared enough to make sure she felt valued. She had been 23 and sure her life was over. Now she was 50, surrounded by children and grandchildren, married to the love of her life, and happier than she had ever imagined possible. All because Xander Young had given her a birthday celebration and shown her what it meant to be loved. The years continued their steady march, but Elena and Xander faced them together. They grew older, their bodies slowing but their love never diminishing. They saw more grandchildren born, attended weddings and celebrations, grieved together when old friends passed away. Through it all, they remained each other's anchor, each other's joy. On Elena's 60th birthday, she woke to find that Xander had recreated that first birthday celebration as exactly as possible. There was a simple cake, wildflowers in a jar, and the two of them alone in their cabin. Their children had offered to come, but Xander had asked for this day to be just the two of them. "Why?" Elena had asked when he made the request. "Because I want to remember where we started," Xander had replied. "Before the children and grandchildren, before our lives became so full. I want to remember when it was just us, and you had never had a birthday celebration, and I wanted to give you joy." So on her 60th birthday, they sat at the same table where they had shared that first celebratory meal. The cake was vanilla, just like the first one. The wildflowers were daisies and black-eyed Susans. And Xander looked at her with the same intensity he had shown 37 years ago, when he was a mountain man, and she was a lonely seamstress, and neither of them knew what the future would hold. "Make a wish," Xander said, lighting the candles. Elena looked at the candles, at her husband, at the life they had built together in these mountains. What could she wish for? She had everything she had ever wanted and more than she had ever dreamed possible. She had love and family, security and purpose, a home and a partner who cherished her. "I cannot think of anything to wish for," she said honestly. "I have everything." "Then wish for more of the same," Xander suggested. "More years together, more love, more joy." So Elena closed her eyes and wished for exactly that. More time with the man who had saved her life and given her a reason to celebrate. She blew out the candles and opened her eyes to find Xander smiling at her. "Thank you," she said. "For this, for everything, for 37 years of love and happiness. Thank you for giving me my first birthday celebration and everyone since." "It has been my privilege," Xander replied, "and my joy. You have made my life complete, Elena. I was half a man before I met you, and you made me whole." They spent the day quietly, just the two of them, talking and reminiscing and celebrating the life they had shared. As the sun set and they sat on their porch watching the familiar play of light on the peaks, Elena felt profound peace. This was where she belonged. This man was who she belonged with. Everything that had come before, all the hardship and loneliness, had been worth it to arrive at this moment. Elena lived to be 78 years old, spending every single one of her final birthdays with Xander by her side. Each celebration was special, each one a reminder of how far they had come from that first desperate day in Fort Benton. They had 7 grandchildren and 12 great-grandchildren by the time Elena passed, dying peacefully in her sleep with Xander's arms around her. Xander lived 3 more years after Elena's death, staying in the mountain cabin they had shared because he still felt her presence there. He spent his time with his children and grandchildren, passing on stories and wisdom. But everyone could see that part of him had died with Elena. He was simply waiting to join her. When Xander Young died at 82, he was laid to rest next to Elena in a small cemetery on the mountain they had both loved. Their children carved a simple marker that read, "Xander and Elena Young. They found each other in the wild and built a life of love." And though they were gone, their legacy lived on in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their blood and their stories. The tale of how a mountain man had given a lonely seamstress her first birthday celebration became family legend, told and retold through the generations. It was a reminder that love could appear when least expected, that kindness could change everything, and that everyone deserved to be celebrated. In the end, Elena Baker, who became Elena Young, who had never had a birthday celebration until a mountain man made sure her next one was filled with joy and cake, had lived a life full of exactly that. Joy, sweetness, and the knowledge that she was deeply, profoundly loved.